Let's continue with the second video in chapter 2. Some of you might be wondering what happened if I change the type of the variable for area, let's say from double to integer. Okay, and that's the nice thing about this. You can try whatever you want. If you have questions, the best way to answer that question is just to try it on the code. And you can see here that we have an error. Okay, why is that? Because I'm trying to assign a value that is of the double type to a value that is of the integer type, and that would not work. Right? You can see here type mismatch. That's your error when you hover over that. You can double click on the X, and then pretty much it will ask you to change it to double. Okay, so let's do that. We change it to double, and then it's nice. What about this one? When I change the integer to double, well, nothing happens, right? Because in this case, what it will do is that the radius now instead of being 20, it's gonna be 20.0. Right? That's kind of like the implication there, right? So if you don't care about the fact that you're gonna have decimal points, use double. That's your safe bet. You're always gonna get decimal values. But if you want to truncate the decimals out, then you go with integer. Another thing that I like to do, not many people will do this, but I have found it convenient over the year, is that I create a section that is going to be called declare variable. And now what I'll do here is that all my variable declarations will be in this section. So for example here, I will take my integer radius, I'm going to copy and then paste here. That will give me an error because you're going to have double declarations. But then I'll take this out and here, right? And then I'll do the same for area. And then I will move it here. So I will be looking, this is more efficient. So in the section in your rubric about efficiency, this is something I'm going to look for. Why do this? If your program gets extensive, let's say hundreds and hundreds of lines, and then you are just adding variables or adding formulas at different points in the program, this will make it much easier to program, right? Because let's say that, let's just go back to double area, okay, the way I had it before. And then let's say that you make a change where you need the area to be used here. Area is equal to radius plus 5, right? You can see that now I get an error. Why? Because my area is not declared, the type. So now you will have to move this double to this line. And that, when you're dealing with 25 different variables, different points in the program, is inconvenient. But if you have everything at the top, like the way I had it, just get rid of this line, then you can add the area variable whenever you want in the program. Makes it more easier. Second advantage is that if you need to find out what is the type of these variables or change the type, you know that is at the beginning of your program. All you have to do is just go to the top and you can see all the declarations. The user doesn't have to look for it. Okay, so now let's talk about having the user enter the variable, right? That way they don't have to hard code that. So let me just go back to the OneNote here. And I said that we have several ways of entering values into our program. One of them is hard code, and then I said that you can input the value, read it from the web, read it from a file. Okay. So in order to either ask the user or read from a file or read from the web, you need to create an object. Right? You need to tell the system how you're going to get that value. Okay. So that's the first thing that we will do. So in the second listing 2.2, you will see that they create what is called a scanner object. So let me just go there so I can show you. Okay, so you will look at this section that says reading input from the console. So you will need this line. Scanner input is equal to new scanner system.in. System.in is pretty much telling the system that you're going to use the keyboard to enter the information, right? And then input is basically the object that you're going to create. So that's how input is going to acquire the power to get values from the keyboard. Okay? And then we're going to then see the methods and how you're going to do that. And then input belongs to this class, which is the scanner class. This is created for you, so you can create this object so you can enter values. So, but in order to use this class, you need to import that class. So that class is part of a package. That's how things are pretty much organized in Java. Okay, so we have package. You will have a package. And inside package, you have classes, which is just basically a collection of functions. And inside these classes, you have then the different methods, right, which are basically functions. So we need to import this package, right? So this package for the scanner class is called java.util.scan, right? It's in the utilities package. So that way you can use the scanner class. Erase this. So that way you can use the scanner class, and then with the scanner class, then you can, then enter different values. So let's copy this line, right? So that this will create our object. So I'm just gonna put it here. Now let me go to okay. So we're gonna enter the radius of the circle or enter values, right? So we're gonna create a scanner object. Okay, so you're gonna say scanner input is equal to new. Here you will say use scanner, and then this is the argument, right? That's how information is gonna get it. System.in. Okay, pretty much system.in is the keyword, and you're gonna see that we have an error because we need to import the class, right? So it says scanner cannot be imported. Scanner is our oversold class, right? So technically we need to import the scanner, right? Java.util. So you double click on that, and then at the top of the program you have import java util.scan. So this will create import this single class. You can also use a star, and it will import all the classes belonging to that package. If you are curious, you can always go to Java documentation, right? So for example, if you type java.util documentation, it will take you to the Oracle website. And you can see here the collection of all the classes that belong to this package. So you can see that we're using scanner. And if you click on that, it will give you, how it basically works. And you can see it's extensive, and these are all the methods, all the things that you can do with the scanner class. Right, so it's up to you to go out there, read, and then try examples and get more proficient with this. Okay, so I import my utility, I got my scanner. So technically now I'm gonna ask the question. I'm gonna say system .out.println enter the radius. actually I don't need the plus. Let me get rid of that. And then here on the radius, now instead of hard coding the value, I will use my object, input. You can name this object whatever you want. I think I mentioned that already. Okay, so I got my waiting symbol, computer thinking. Input. Then dot, and then all the objects are gonna show up, all the methods. You can see here that we have different methods. So in this case, we want next integer, and that pretty much is just telling the computer and we need to enter an integer value. So now when you run this, okay, it says enter radius. I'm gonna type 15, or let's go with the 10 to make sure that everything works. Enter, and then it just prints, right? So it works. And then when it runs again, and then now it says enter radius, I enter my 20, and then it runs again. Okay. Let's take out the ln, see if we have a difference in how this runs. Enter the radius, you see now I can just type next to it 10, and then it prints. Okay, so now here you have the user pretty much entering the value. It's more flexible. Some of you might be wondering what is this little bulb in here. This is a warning. So technically this is a leak in the system. It's not a big deal for purposes of this class, but what is happening is that when you open or when you create this object, you are opening, let's say, a door where people can just store information in there. And that door is not closed, right? So ideally you want to close that door once you are done with your program, or once you are done entering information. Right, so one thing that you can do once you are done, you can close that. So you can use your scanner object, and then you will close it. Okay, so now you don't have any warnings. Right? So everything is closed. Let's talk here about the different methods. Right, so while using the scanner object, you use a next integer, which is the one that we use here. And the most common will be for you will be next integer, next double, where you can enter double type, okay, or next, where you can read one string, okay, or next line, where you're gonna read a line of text. Okay, so these are the four common. Byte, short. I mean, in the past you would use this where you were concerned about memory, but now memory is not an issue. So your safe bets are using double, int. These are the most common. Okay, so for example, if I go here, and now instead of using next in, let me just get rid of that. No, actually, let me just leave next in. I'm gonna run this. And now for the radius, I enter 15.4. I got an error, right? Because I got a mismatch error. This is an integer type, the radius. I'm entering a double value. So you will need to change everything to double. Okay, so in order to get this going the way you want it. So let's change it to, instead of next in, let's go with next double. Okay. I still got an error because radius is defined as an integer. So I need to make everything match. So I go here with double. Okay, so now everything is okay. I run it, 15.4, and it works. You can double check your calculation. 15.4 squared times 5, 97, and it works, right? Same number. Let's go and talk about also other things about declaring variables. You can also declare multiple variables. Here, for example, you have double radius and area. technically you can also move this to one line and say area and just get rid of this one. Okay. Also valid. I like to have them in multiple lines, easier to follow, easier to change things. You can also make your variable constant. So, for example, by using the final keyword. So let's declare this guy as pi, okay? And then let's just use 3.1415927. Okay. So this is a constant value. This warning is because the variable is not being used. So now I'm just going to replace this guy for pi. So now we have a constant value. So what this means is that I cannot, if I come here and I assign pi is equal to 5, it's going to give me an error, right? Because when you read here, it says you cannot just basically change the value of this variable. So that's convenient for fixing values. Not everything needs to be fixed, right? Just depends if you are using technically constants. One thing that I'm going to really pay attention to is if you follow the naming convention. Okay, so please go over the section called naming convention. So under naming conventions, you have the following. Just read this section. They need to be lowercase. Okay. So for variables, the first letter, and then the other ones uppercase. And then for classes, then we know that they have to be uppercase, the first word. And then for constants, right now you can see it right here, they have to be all caps, right? So that's for constant. So make sure that you pay attention to that. Okay, so we follow to the next video to try to finish some things in chapter 2.